Dialogue at the Wilson Center is a production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. And now here's your host, John Molesky.
Hello and welcome to the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. Each week, Dialogue explores the world of ideas and issues in international affairs, history, and culture. This week, we take a look at President Obama's second term through the lenses of history and Hollywood. Our guest served for 18 years in the U.S. House of Representatives, representing the 4th Congressional District of Kansas. He went on to serve as Secretary of Agriculture during the Clinton administration before becoming chairman of the Motion Picture Association of America from 2004 to 2010. He's currently a senior fellow at the Bipartisan Policy Institute. Dan Glickman, welcome to Dialogue at the Wilson Center.
Thank you, John. Glad to be with you.
I was excited when I read your piece about the lessons of Lincoln in the Huffington Post because this is a favorite topic of mine, to talk about Hollywood and Washington, and so I'm glad you can join us. Let's put on our film critic hats to start things off, and just your review of the movie.
Historically, it was a great movie. It's a long movie. You had to have some patience to sit there, especially during the last half, but overall, I thought it was a great historical lesson in the power of the presidency, the power of leadership, and the power of somebody who not only had ideas, but who had the practical sense to know how to implement those ideas. So he wanted to get the 13th Amendment through. He wanted to end slavery, but it wasn't just that he wanted to do it. He knew how he had to do it, and that was to work the Congress.
One of the criticisms we often hear of historical pieces is that they sort of homogenize and pasteurize history in a way that dilutes the complexities. Was this film guilty of that?
I don't think so. I think that's one of the reasons why it was tedious for a while. I mean, this was a long movie. It was a movie you had to really sit and listen and focus and and not fall asleep in, at least for a while. But it did characterize Lincoln as a leader and the moral issues that Lincoln went through, and most significantly, what he had to do to get done what he wanted to do. And he recognized the only way to do that was to work the Congress. And that's the great lesson of this movie, in my opinion. It was that it's not only to have great ideas, but you have to be willing to get your hands dirty and get those ideas implemented.
In the piece you wrote, you mentioned it, and this often is the least favorite part of the job for presidents. Why is that?
Well, you know, I was a congressman once, and I'm not sure that I would have liked working with me if I had been the president. I mean, we all have our own constituencies, working on our own things, our own issues, our own states, and so making laws is like making sausage. It's not a particularly pretty thing to do, and most presidents, other than Lyndon Johnson, I think, weren't really keen on getting down and dirty, but you have to recognize that in our system of government, the Article I branch, the executive, and the Article II branch, the Congress, are equals. So there is no choice. If you want to be an effective president, you have to get and work the Congress.
Is there something about the presidential ego, perhaps, that doesn't accept that, co-equal?
Well, I'm sure that a lot of presidents think that members of Congress are not all up to the same level that they are. But it's just time. You know, you're working international foreign policy issues, and working the Congress means individual relationship building, making telephone calls, having these people over. There are 535 of them, but they frankly all are glad to get a presidential call. I mean, the fact of the matter is, no matter who the president is, if a president shows attention to a member of Congress, it can work miracles.
Tommy Lee Jones, in the role of Thaddeus Stevens, you highlight this quote where Lincoln says to Stevens, while Stevens is balking at perhaps compromising his values in what he will or won't say on the House floor, says, "What's the use of knowing true north when the compass cannot tell you how to avoid the swamps and mountains in your way?"
Yeah, you know, that was a great quote. The fact of the matter is that there are many ways to skin a cat, and good presidents know that no matter how right their position is, sometimes they have to take detours and meander through the intricacies of life to get what they want. And sometimes it means keeping quiet, shutting up, not shouting how smart you are to the rest of the world, and that's what Lincoln was basically telling Thaddeus Stevens there.
Is it too early to tell that, whether or not this president is digesting the lessons of Lincoln?
You know, I think that the last 6 months, I think that we see a president who is much more secure and confident with his own agenda. I think it was tough for the first 2 or 3 years. It's always tough for a president to figure out that in order to get anything done, the president leads, the president proposes, but it's the Congress that disposes. And I worked in both branches, and it's just the way it is. And so I think that, but at the same time, he's got to send out the signals, he's got to send out the agenda, He's got to be the guiding star to let the country know where it needs to go, and then pull the Congress along with him.
You began this piece that I referenced earlier with this sentence: "I've long believed that great movies can change the world."
Yes.
Quite a statement. Literally, is this what you believe?
I do. I love movies. I think they're extremely powerful. I think that you take a movie like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, where Senator Jefferson Smith, played by Jimmy Stewart, filibustered the Senate, fighting the powerful special interests. I mean, that was, you know, it was an amazing thing. But it's not just political movies. Movies like Gandhi, Chariots of Fire, all great, powerful movies can emote ideas and get people to think above themselves and change the world. So not all movies do that. A lot of movies are either totally for fun, or some movies probably have no redeeming value whatsoever. But movies can do that. The old adage, a picture is worth 1,000 words, is true, and especially when it's great ideas are being discussed.
Is there a film or a number or a couple of films that you would point to as the best examples of this, films that you feel had an impact or influence that went beyond the film houses?
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, there are big films and small films. I like films that show that the little guy can take on the system and win, like The Shawshank Redemption. Mm-hmm. That was a film that really got me because, you know, Morgan Freeman and can't even think who was the other main actor in that movie, but Robbins.
Timothy Robbins.
Timothy Robbins. Yes. You know, they fought a kind of improper conviction, and that movie became very, very popular. And you know, there are movies like that where you take somebody and can fight injustice, and it doesn't have to. In fact, when I was at the Motion Picture Association, we did our best to try to get movies into China, and a Chinese government official once told me, he says, "We don't keep your movies out." They censored a lot of movies, still do. And they said, "We don't keep your movies out because we think they're too political. We keep a lot of your movies out because the theme of your movies
too
is
inspirational."
It's often the little guy taking on the system. The system could be the mother-in-law or the business or whatever, and they said it's not necessarily part of our culture to encourage people to foment dissent.
This is the Davy and Goliath archetype.
A little bit like that, certainly.
Is that an accurate lesson? Is that, I guess what I'm asking, does that depict Washington? Is that the little guy versus the big powers a fair demonstration of what Washington is about?
I think it's a fair demonstration maybe of what Washington should be about. I think that in recent years, Washington has become awash in a lot of things, too much campaign money. It's much easier for powerful interests to control the agenda. And I'm not a revolutionary in this regard. I'm just saying and periodically the voices of righteousness and courage and those things do percolate up in our political system, but it's a lot tougher certainly than it used to be. And that's why movies like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington or Advise and Consent, there are a lot of movies that show where individual people can be inspired to not accept things the way they are, and sometimes just take courageous decisions in order to move the world forward.
In this regard, is accuracy important? You think of films of Oliver Stone. He had his trio of JFK and Nixon and W, and a lot of the criticism was that he took way too many artistic license, ability to make up scenes. How important is that?
Well, you know, a movie like Lincoln, you certainly wouldn't want a totally revisionist view of history and have Lincoln doing something that he didn't do. You know, Oliver Stone produced narratives which were probably closer to fiction than truth. Without making a political statement there, but remember that the entertainment industry is to entertain. If you can get some movies out there that actually show historical drama the way they were, that's all the better. But you got to make it so that people will want to go see it.
It's not a documentary.
It's not a documentary. So let's take the movie today, Zero Dark 30, which is a movie about the bin Laden raid. And there are some allegations that the movie shows, let's say, terrorism too dramatically, or could have taken licenses with the actual truth. It's always important to remember that a movie is a movie. As Shakespeare said, the play is the thing. So not every movie is going to be absolutely historically accurate, although I think even that movie was largely historically accurate.
So you've seen Zero Dark 30?
I've seen it. I thought it was an excellent movie.
Now, a lot of the complaints you hear, especially in this town, is that the first half hour to 45 minutes essentially is a film about torture.
Yeah, you know, first of all, it's a movie. if they had made the film about people sitting around in the upstairs in the CIA talking to each other for the whole time, nobody would have gone and seen the movie. So, you know, the fact of the matter is that man bites dog gets more attention than dog bites man. But notwithstanding that, I thought they did a very good job, you know, given the nature of the facts, and also the importance of making the movie interesting enough so people would go and see it.
There seems, is this my imagination, or has the distance between an actual event and a dramatization of it on film, has that shrunk? Zero Dark 30, for example, is quickly after the real event of the death of bin Laden.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think part of it is the nature of the media today, particularly the 24-hour television media and internet and social networking. It makes real events and the dramatization of real events a lot closer. It makes people know about these things much faster than they used to. So yeah, I think you do have a faster time period between the event itself and when it's either shown on television or shown in the movies.
Well, I think also Game Change, not a theatrical release, but an HBO film,
Yeah.
where an Emmy Award-winning performance in the depiction of Sarah Palin. That also, all the contemporaries are still active.
Well,
President Obama's still in the White House.
And then you have docudramas all over television. If you ever watch Lifetime TV, which tens of millions of people watch, they do a lot of dramas of true events that are dramatized. Mostly these are human stories, not necessarily great political stories. But when a movie like Game Change and others comes out, it's a tribute to companies like HBO and others who decide to put some money into things so that people can see history in action. In the movie Lincoln, people will now be able to see history in action all over the country. I'm sure that movie is going to be shown in schools. It will be used as an educational tool. That's really important.
How challenging is it for the filmmakers and the studios to take on a project in, let's look at Zero Dark 30, all the sensitivities involved, an ongoing so-called war on terror. The contemporaries who were involved in the raid and the death of bin Laden are still in office. The politics are still highly charged. How sensitive an undertaking is this?
I think the filmmakers have found this to be a heck of a lot more sensitive than they thought it was going to be, because they have people from the CIA and people inside the government, the Senate, and other places gotten very nervous about this, because the truth may be closer to the truth than in most movies.
Too close for comfort.
Yeah, now a movie like Lincoln, the great courage that Spielberg and others did was they took a historical movie that was, you know, old, 150, 160 years old, and decided to see if they could make it interesting enough to get people back into the theaters looking at an important part of American history. It's really important, because I have to tell you, one of the great gaps we have in our educational system in this country is teaching people, not just kids, teaching people about civics, about government, about the unique things that happen to make our country great. So you get a movie like Lincoln, my goodness gracious, it's like manna from heaven that we actually have something that actually might teach people about America.
My son's social studies teacher gave extra credit to any students who saw Lincoln on the side.
Sounds like a good teacher to me.
Argo, another recent film.
Yeah.
And this is real interesting blending of reality and fiction. President Carter does voiceover during the credits at the end of the film.
Yeah, this was a good movie, and this movie was the juxtaposition of the film industry, because, you know, the way they got this thing going was to come up with a fake movie. So they used Hollywood in real time to kind of as a cover to get these guys out that were stuck in the Canadian embassy. It was a very clever movie, and I'm not sure the movie was 100% factual again. And people shouldn't demand
Apparently
that.
the Canadians thought that the depiction of the Canadian ambassador and their role was underplayed.
I thought, I thought they got good credit in that movie, but there were some technical problems. I'm a big aviation nut. At the end, the car's chasing the airplane,
Yeah.
and the plane's taking off, and the car's chasing them. Not possible when a plane's going 160
My
miles an
suspension
hour.
of disbelief was jarred by that scene. I have
know,
to say that was the
so,
biggest flaw.
But you know, again, it's movies. It's just you're supposed to have a little bit of disbelief in this.
What's
thing.
really interesting about this one is Jimmy Carter, viewed by his critics as a weak president who suffered under this hostage crisis, made a bold move in greenlighting this project, but couldn't talk about it until now.
Well, not only couldn't talk about it, but it failed. I mean, the Argo part succeeded,
Right.
but that was the main group of hostages. Obviously, took a long time, and the military action failed. You know, the old expression, "Success has 1,000 fathers, failure is an orphan." Poor Jimmy Carter was an orphan all these years, and Barack Obama was successful, and I think that obviously big difference between the two events.
I put together a little list here, a random list of some political movies over time, and I just want to run a few of them by you and get some reaction about their significance and how All the President's Men is one of the granddaddies.
Very significant because great historical action in American life was dramatized right before our eyes.
The Candidate with Robert Redford.
Yeah, that one was a lot more fiction than truth.
Satire.
Yeah, but it was at the end. Remember when he got elected? He says, "Now what do we do?" And you know, when I was a freshman congressman in 1976, I got elected. I said the same thing. You know, so
Dr. Strangelove, Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah, I mean, again, a terrific movie, an allegory. But a clear attack on the nature of nuclear power, nuclear war.
Here's a story I came across. I'm not sure if you knew this one. In the movie The Best Man, a 1964 film, Gore Vidal's script, not available on DVD, currently only VHS, but Ronald Reagan was turned down for the role because the studio felt he didn't look presidential.
And that was Henry Fonda got the role?
Henry Fonda and
Cliff Robertson
was in a primary.
Yeah,
the opponents.
You know, I mean, well, Reagan showed them, didn't he? You know, I can say that was also a very good movie too.
What about a film like 13 Days, where you see the Cuban Missile Crisis through the eyes of a Kennedy aide, portrayed in this case by Kevin Costner?
That movie was not a big box office success, even though it was, to those of us who lived back then, I was in college when that happened, you know, and thinking that the end of the world was coming, nuclear war was going to happen tomorrow. But again, good historical narrative of some very important part of American history.
We talked about Game Change already, so I want to mention Primary Colors, John Travolta and Emma Thompson as clearly as the Clintons.
Yeah, well, you know, they denied it for so long, and of course the author denied writing it for so long. And you know, I mean, I didn't think that movie was a powerful, lasting narrative, but it was fun. Especially if you'd worked in the Clinton administration.
Here's Being There is a very interesting political movie. Peter Sellers.
I remember that movie because it was a great, Jerzy Kosinski, it was a great piece of writing. And it showed, remember, he kept saying it was talking about agriculture.
Talking about his garden.
His garden, in the garden, and no matter what question he was asking, they kept saying, brilliant. We never heard a more brilliant thing in our life because he was saying something like...
he's speaking metaphorically. He was actually speaking about his garden.
You know, which is a good lesson for politicians today because maybe they're not quite so important as they think they are.
Well, that sometimes remind me of some of the scenes in Lincoln where the president would launch into a story. If you remember the one comical scene where they're in the midst of a military attack, and he begins telling a story, and one of the aides says, "I can't take this anymore," and storms off. He can't take another story.
Yeah, but you know, that's also a good lesson in life too, life is about narrative. Life is about stories. Presidents who can tell stories or narrative will be a lot more successful than president reciting facts or political rhetoric. And I go back to Shakespeare, I said this before, when he said the play is the thing. It's true in politics as it is in movies and everywhere else.
Frost Nixon, another one I want to mention, another portrayal of Richard Nixon other than the Oliver Stone version. Frank Langella, terrific turn as Nixon.
It was, and that also was a very important movie because it was a part of history that we had not really seen very much of. I remember seeing those the shows on PBS with David Frost, but it was a lot more poignant this time.
Sort of the bookend to All the President's Men in a lot of ways, that film.
Yeah, well, you know, and you saw what a tragic but complicated character Nixon was. Oh, not all bad, as we had grown up to think about him, but just very complicated.
So how many movies do you see in a year?
Well, I see a lot, and my son is in this business. My son's the president of MGM, the film division of MGM. Just a little plug for him, but and so their studio did Skyfall, which was quite a successful movie with, you know,
James
with
Bond,
James
50th
Bond,
anniversary
50th anniversary, and. But I see a lot, you know, and I get the screeners too, so I will see them. But I much rather prefer to see a movie on the big screen. You just can't get the feel. I saw Zero Dark 30 in a screener, and I couldn't hear it. I couldn't see it very well. You see it on the big screen. I thought it was a very powerful movie.
Yeah, you want to see it on the big screen. The old joke, DC is Hollywood for ugly people. How much is DC and are the two cities alike, the two cultures alike?
They're alike. I think the big difference is in Hollywood, it's money and power. And in Washington, it's more position and power.
But one lives by the box office, the other lives by the polls.
Yeah, but you know what? The public is voting in both cases. So there are a lot of parallels there. And it's funny, when I was in the Motion Picture Association, I had a guy, a congressman unnamed, who didn't like Hollywood, didn't like the politics of Hollywood because he thought it was more left than right, in which case it's really not. It's all over the lot. But whenever we would invite him down for a screening at the Motion Picture Association, he would come in is what we'd say in a New York minute. He loved the movies. So one of the great things, this great American art form, the movies, it tells lots of stories. As I said, there are good movies, bad movies, movies in the middle and everything in between, different strokes for different folks. But by and large, I think it's probably the most powerful art form the world has ever seen.
Well, and thank you for spending some time talking to us about it.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
2 thumbs up, as we say in the
that's right.
When we return, more on President Obama's second term and what we can expect in the foreign policy arena right after this.
The Wilson Center is America's living memorial to its 28th president, connecting the world of policymaking to practical options derived from the world's finest ideas, research, analysis, and honest, nonpartisan conversation. Visit us on the web at wilsoncenter.org. And now we return to more dialogue at the Wilson Center.
Welcome back. Aaron Miller is the Wilson Center's Vice President for New Initiatives. He's been an advisor on Middle East policy to both Republican and Democratic Secretaries of State. We asked him to provide context on what to expect in the foreign policy arena during a second Obama term. This is what he had to say. What are the lessons of history that apply to second terms?
I mean, legacy competes with lame duckery here. The reality is that freed from the constraints of re-election, on paper at least, the president should be freer to achieve some of those objectives that he might not have been able to accomplish, or indeed new ones in his first term. Now that competes, it seems to me, with other priorities, with the world, both domestic and foreign, that intrude. The same political issues and substantive issues that made the first term problem so challenging don't go away. The question is whether or not the president has the credibility and the time to sustain the risk that is required in order to lead. And I think certainly on foreign policy, that has proven not to be the case. That in fact, I call it the second term illusion. On some of the most difficult problems, the real constraint is not the political one. It's whether or not there's an opportunity present, whether the world offers up an opportunity in order for a second term president to succeed. Because remember, legacy is important, but if you go out failing, that is your legacy. So you have to take that in.
Given the current circumstances, both at home and abroad, how should we adjust our expectations?
I've argued from the beginning that this president came in to transform the political reality in the United States and to focus primarily on a domestic agenda. His foreign policy has been competent, no spectacular successes, sans killing Osama bin Laden, and no spectacular failures either. And I think that reflects where the country is at this moment. Now, in light of recent events, I think there is now for the first time, maybe, a chance to do some serious gun control. That, in addition to dealing with a fiscal cliff that will be a perennial problem. It's not going to go away. A longer-term deal on deficit, immigration reform, implementation of Obamacare. All of these things are going to be important, and I would argue really will be the legacy of this president. His legacy on foreign policy, I think, is simply this. He got us out of the 2 longest wars in American history, and he prevented another attack on the continental United States. Anything beyond that, it seems to me, that he can succeed in or achieve, I think is frankly gravy. So what are those issues? In the Middle East, there are 3 challenges that confront him, and I would argue they'll be there when he leaves the White House 4 years from now. One is the problem of what to do, not only about Iran's nuclear program, but its whole regional ambitions. How to deal with Iran as probably the most serious non-Arab power other than Israel in the region. Second, how to comport himself with respect to the Arab Spring, which now looks more like a winter everywhere. How to find a footing for an America that has seen both its friends and its enemies disappear. And finally, of course, the knotty, intractable issue of what I call the problem of the much too promised land. What to do about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. These are all long movies. These are all issues in which substantial alteration and opportunity will largely be driven by the parties themselves, and really beyond our capacity to control. If the Iranians want to make a deal, then I suspect Obama will be up for it. If the Israelis and the Palestinians come to a point where there's enough pain and gain to change their calculations, then Obama definitely will be up to try to lend the hand that he can. Arab Spring and Arab Winter, the whole process of democratization is going to be a very long one. And we're going to have to find a way to respect democratic elections, even though we might not be terribly comfortable with the outcome. So I suspect he will be fairly deliberate and cautious here. He'll wait to see what opportunities offer up, and if he does sense one on both the Iranian issue and the Israeli-Palestinian one, I think there is a chance that he'll be prepared to risk something in an effort to get a deal and prevent war with Iran on one hand and the end of the two-state solution.
Can President Obama define a grand strategy before leaving office?
There is no grand strategy. Caution, deliberation, thinking before acting. When necessary, act unilaterally, killing Osama bin Laden. But most of the time, if you can, find safety and refuge in some sort of multilateral consensus. Avoid reckless military adventures and encumbering foreign policy problems in which the end state is not clear. Syria, of course, is the one example here. All of this has come at the expense of charging the administration with lack of leadership, or even worse, leading from behind. But I think it's a necessary corrective. I think it reflects the consensus of where the country is when it comes to an end to the roller coaster ride of trying to fix everybody else's broken house except ours. And that is the priority, it seems to me, for this administration.
New editions of Context can be found each week at wilsoncenter.org/context. That's all for this edition of Dialogue at the Wilson Center. Until next week, I'm John Molesky. Thanks for joining us.
We'd like to hear from you. Please send your questions or comments to dialogue@wilsoncenter.org. You can also follow us on Facebook. Search Dialogue Television and Radio. Our host's Twitter feed is twitter.com/John Molesky. Dialogue is a co-production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and MHZ Networks. Dialogue is available via broadcast, cable, satellite, and telco on MHZ Worldview throughout the United States. To see how to watch where you live, visit www.mhznetworks.org.